The stars used to feel empty. He remembered that silence well. The hum of a ship barely alive, his crew breathing like ghosts behind him. The cold metal beneath his boots. Nothing out there but space, dust, and the ever-growing mockery of what humans were now. Fragments of a species scattered across minor colonies, surviving in the shadows of superior civilizations. Captain Thorne had long stopped believing in fairy tales. The idea that humans were anything more than latecomers to a galactic party already centuries old was laughable. They barely had access to clean water on half their colonies, let alone the tech to keep up with the Ascendants or the Arthari. Those species had been charting stars while Earth was still worshipping fire. And yet, something had changed. It started with a signal. Weak. Broken. Bouncing through the void like an echo that had no right still existing. It wasn't alien. No, he would have ignored it if it was. This was different. This was in ancient Terran frequency bands, bands no one had used in tens of thousands of years. He wouldn't have believed it himself if it hadn't hit him in the gut. Something about it felt wrong. Not malfunctioning, not corrupted. Wrong, like a dead man whispering in your ear from across a battlefield. The crew of the Vagrant Sun was skeptical when he brought it to them. They were smugglers now, scavengers if they were being generous. Chasing ghosts didn't pay, and their fuel cells weren't going to refill themselves. But Thorne wasn't asking. He just set the course. They could leave if they wanted. They didn't. The signal pulled them toward a system unmarked on any current maps. No trade lanes, no comm buoys, no life. Just 3 dead planets orbiting a red giant and a 4th one torn in half like a rotten fruit. But in the debris field around it, they found them. Monsters. Floating there, silent and cold, were 4 ships the size of cities. Warships, obviously. But not like anything even the most advanced species had ever shown. Their hulls were etched in designs older than language. Their form looked more grown than built. No docking ports, no signs of damage, no decay, just waiting. And the strangest part? They were arranged in formation. "They're powered down," his engineer muttered. "Dead, have to be." "No," Thorne said. "They're listening." He didn't know why he said it. The words just came out, like someone had put them in his mouth. That night, he couldn't sleep. His dreams were blood-soaked, metal grinding, stars burning, voices screaming in a tongue that made his skull ache. He woke with a nosebleed and a whisper in his ear. "Command authorized." The next morning, the ship's lights flickered. Systems glitched. The Vagrant Sun's AI crashed. But outside, one of the massive relics turned, slowly, deliberately, toward them. The crew panicked. One of them tried to take a shuttle and leave. He didn't get far. The warship fired a single pulse. No explosion, no debris, just vapor. Gone. Then the message came. Inheritor recognized. Access granted. Thorne stared at it, his hands shaking. His name was encoded in the message. Not just his name, his DNA signature. "Someone want to tell me what the hell is going on?" his second-in-command hissed. He didn't have an answer, not one he could say out loud. Because deep in his bones he knew, these weren't alien ships. These were human, and they were waiting for someone like him to come home. He didn't sleep again. Not really. The flickering lights on the Vagrant Sun pulsed like the slow, steady heartbeat of something not quite dead. Something that had been still for too long. The crew barely spoke as they orbited the relic warships, tension thick enough to crack steel. They weren't just scared. They were off. Skittish, watching each other like someone might suddenly turn into something else, like they'd brought something back with them from the void. And maybe they had. Thorne stood alone on the bridge, staring at the nearest warship through the viewport. It was impossible to tell how old it was. No rust, no decay. Its surface was dark, matte, etched with impossible geometry that made his head ache if he looked too long. Not human, not alien. Something else. But what terrified him most wasn't its size or its silence. It was the faint sense of familiarity he felt staring at it, like he'd seen it before in a dream, or maybe in a memory buried too deep to recall. The comms crackled. "Inheritor, you are known to us. You carry the blood of command." The voice was mechanical, flat, but there was something beneath it, something cold and ancient, not AI, not alive, something in between. Thorn stepped closer to the console. "Who are you?" A pause. "We are your silence. We are the teeth you forgot." The screen flickered. A second warship rotated slightly. The stars seemed to dim around it. "Docking corridor now open?" He looked at the crew readouts. Systems stable, weapons offline. Life support functioning, barely. But the ship had opened to him. Specifically to him, not the crew, not humanity, him. Of course, they argued. "What do you mean you're going aboard?" Raynor barked, slamming a fist on the console. "That thing fired on Tez and erased him from existence like he didn't matter, and now it's calling to you by name like some goddamn prophet?" Thorn didn't blink. "I'm not asking for permission." Raynor stepped forward, fists clenched. "We're not military, Thorn. We're not even a crew anymore. We're scavengers, smugglers. You walk into that thing, we might never see you again." "Then don't wait." He walked out without another word. The docking corridor between the vagrant sun and the warship felt colder than space itself. Frost crawled along the interior walls of the passage. His breath fogged instantly. His boots echoed against the metal like he was walking through a tomb. And yet, the lights responded to him, glowing faintly beneath his steps, guiding him inward. The moment he stepped into the warship's interior, the world changed. No gravity, no heat, no sound. The walls weren't metal. Not entirely. They were some fusion of organic material and machine, smooth yet covered in raised glyphs that pulsed faintly as he walked by. The halls were wide, built for something larger than men. But the ship didn't feel abandoned. It felt asleep. Until he reached the central chamber. It opened before him like an eye, massive, circular, filled with black monoliths pulsing with power. At the center, an obelisk of crystal and metal floated above a small platform. He stepped onto it instinctively. The moment his boots touched it, the obelisk dropped silently and stabbed into his palm. No pain, no blood, just warmth. His vision blurred. Then, memory, but not his. He saw stars explode, galaxies devoured, fleets of warships, billions strong, tearing across the void. He saw humans, not like now. Tall, armored, glowing eyes, voices like thunder, leading armies against things no species remembered, beings made of shadow and time, creatures that whispered into the black and made stars die screaming. He saw Earth, but not the Earth he knew. Not green, not blue, just a blackened sphere of obsidian, ringed by weapons so powerful they bent space around them. He saw himself. No, someone else, but with his face, standing at the center of it all. Then the memory shattered. He dropped to his knees, gasping. The warship pulsed once, softly. "You are him. Or what remains." He whispered. "What? What was this? What was I?" "Commander of the First Flame, wielder of the Crucible Fleet, bringer of the end." Thorn staggered back. "That's not me. I don't remember any of this. That's not possible." "Memory decays. Legacy does not. You carry the gene seal, The code of command. You were made to return. He looked around at the pulsing walls. Return to what? A long pause. War. Back on the vagrant sun, the crew watched the warships slowly begin to move. One of them lit up from within, hundreds of pale lights flickering to life across its hull. Then another. Then all four. The crew panicked. "Thorn's triggering something. We've got to get him out of there," someone shouted. No, look," said the pilot, eyes wide. "They're not aiming at us. They're forming up." Raynor stared at the screen. The warships had rotated, now pointing outward toward deep space, toward something coming. Then, like a whisper over a grave, a signal hit the ship. Untranslatable, untethered, but felt. They heard us wake up. Inside the Relic, Thorn walked down corridors that had never known dust. The ship hummed with purpose now, guiding him deeper. It didn't speak again, not in words, but he understood. The others were coming, the ones that made the stars die. The ones that the first flame, his fleet, had fought back in a war no species now remembered. And something worse. The galaxy had lied. Humans weren't new. They weren't the weakest. They weren't even from Earth. They were the first. Something had erased them, buried them, torn their history out of time itself. And now the veil was slipping. "Why me?" Thorn muttered. "Why now?" And the whisper returned, soft as frost. "Because they are coming back, and only fire can answer fire." He returned to the vagrant sun in silence. The docking corridor was lit this time. Warmer. Familiar. The crew stared at him like he was a stranger. "What happened?" Raynor asked quietly. Thorn sat in the captain's chair. "They were ours," he said. "Before the galaxy, before the Ascendants, before everything." Raynor blinked. "Whose are they now?" Thorn looked at him. "Mine." He spent the next 2 days inside the warship. The others didn't follow. They watched from orbit as Thorn began to communicate with the Relic fleet. He didn't eat much, slept even less, and the warships changed. One of them activated its internal hangars, releasing drones that began reconstructing damaged systems on the vagrant sun without request. Another deployed a fleet of small, spherical scouts that spread across the system, mapping everything with silent precision. The third simply remained silent, parked near the shattered planet like it was watching something just beyond visibility. The fourth? It began singing. Not music, not language, just low vibrations that bent comms channels and made animals scream on nearby colonies. The song was a warning. They weren't alone anymore. Something had noticed. On the 6th day, Thorn came back with a message. "They're coming from the edge, something old, something hungry. The first flame thought they killed them. We were wrong." Raynor stared at him. "Who? Who's coming?" Thorn looked him dead in the eye. "The ones who ended us the first time. The ones who erased everything." They made the decision together. They couldn't stay hidden. The galaxy thought humans were pests, bottom feeders, poor, scattered. That lie had protected them. But if the enemy came again and found Earth defenseless, there would be nothing left to bury. And so Thorn gave the order. The warships responded instantly, shifting into a new formation, activating their long-dead engines, space itself folding as they prepared to leave. But first, one final transmission was sent across all known channels. It wasn't long, just one sentence. "The first flame has returned. If you remember the stars screaming, run." The message hit every channel in the galaxy at once, encrypted or not, public or private, military, commercial, diplomatic. It didn't matter. From the glittering towers of the Arthari Senate to the filth-stained alleyways of collapsed Terran colonies, The same line of text burned itself into every screen, every neural feed, every implanted interface. The first flame has returned. If you remember the stars screaming, run. No coordinates, no sender ID, no demand. Just a truth older than time itself, rising from the silence of history like a god dragging itself out of a grave. The galaxy didn't know how to react. Because the galaxy, for all its pride and technology, had built its identity on a lie, that humans were new, that they were weak, that they had never mattered. The Arthari, so smug in their knowledge, so confident in their timelines, were the first to panic. Their high tribunal locked down within 3 hours. The Senate issued a galactic blackout order. Historical archives were wiped. Universities ordered to destroy any records referencing pre-galactic human anomalies. But it was already too late, because there were whispers. There had always been whispers. Old ruins on dead moons with human DNA encoded in the stones. Planets scorched with weapons not even the Arthari understood. Signals buried so deep in the void that no known species could translate them. Except now, those signals were responding. To one voice, Captain Thorne's. He sat in silence inside the command spire of the lead warship, Crucible 1, staring at the projected star maps as they shifted in real time. The ship had begun scanning the outer edges of the galactic rim, pinging dark zones untouched for eons. The AI, if it could be called that, wasn't just looking. It was remembering, cross-referencing ancient war maps, locating old battle sites, searching for signs of them, the ones who ended humanity the first time. "They have many names," the AI said, its voice like glass grinding on bone. "You call them the Unlight, the Star Eaters, the Dream Plague, the ones who unmade the Empire." Thorne didn't move. "Where are they now?" he asked. A pause. "Waiting. Like you. Like us. They have always waited, because they knew you would return." He clenched his fists. His hands still bore the faint mark of the gene seal, where the command spike had pierced his skin days ago. It didn't hurt, but it itched, not on the flesh, in the blood, as if his very DNA was rewriting itself. "You mean to tell me I was built for this?" he said quietly. "That all this time, humanity wasn't evolving. We were just waiting for the key to turn?" "Your kind was broken," the AI replied. "Shattered. Memory stripped. History dissolved into myth. You were left behind because you were dangerous, because even the gods feared you. And now the blood has remembered." The warships moved through the edge systems like ancient leviathans, silent and unchallenged. No species dared engage them directly. The first to try, an ascendant military scout vessel, opened fire on approach. It didn't survive the second volley. No explosion, no debris, just absence. The Crucible fleet didn't broadcast warnings. They didn't threaten. They didn't negotiate. They just kept moving. And behind them, signals long thought dead began to respond. Beacons buried beneath desert moons, weapons platforms forgotten on drifting asteroids. Entire planetary cores that lit up like hearts remembering how to beat. Something had changed. And it was spreading. Back on Earth, if it could still be called Earth, things were falling apart. The United Terran Coalition, long reduced to a weak council of squabbling colony representatives and corporations, could no longer ignore the truth. A vessel the size of a small moon had entered the Sol system 2 days ago. No announcement, no warning. It simply parked itself in orbit behind Mars, cloaked in the shadow of the red planet, and waited. They tried to communicate. No response. Then a single broadcast was sent to Earth's surface. "Where is the inheritor?" That was it. And yet, Millions dropped to their knees when they heard it, because something inside them remembered. Something buried in nightmares and inherited trauma. A flash of ash. Fire. A name whispered before sleep. First Flame. Captain Thorne didn't want this, not really, but he couldn't stop now. Raynor approached him cautiously inside the Crucible's command deck, eyes bloodshot. He looked smaller now, like the weight of the truth was crushing him inch by inch. "You seeing what's happening out there?" he asked quietly. Thorne nodded. "Some of the colonies are rioting. Others are praying. That transmission from Earth? It's gone viral. Everyone thinks you're some kind of messiah." Thorne didn't respond. "Are you?" Raynor asked, voice tight. "No." "Then what the hell are you?" He looked at him, dead in the eyes. Awake. The dreams were getting worse. Every time Thorne closed his eyes, he saw pieces of the past. But they weren't his past. They belonged to someone else. Someone who had stood at the center of an empire that made current civilizations look like children playing with rocks. He saw burning suns used as weapons. He saw cities built inside black holes. He saw creatures that should not exist, whose thoughts could warp planets, torn apart by the First Flame's fleet. And he saw himself, or the version of him that came before, standing on the bridge of a vessel so massive it blotted out the sky of an entire sector. A name echoed through the dream. Rael. He awoke gasping. His room was cold. The Crucible hummed around him, the sound almost comforting now. "What is Rael?" he whispered. The AI responded instantly. "Your name, before the fracture, before the death of memory." Thorne sat up. "I'm not him. I'm not a god. I'm just a fragment." But fragments remember. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. For the first time in 20,000 cycles, every species sent a representative. The hall was tense. Fear stank in the air. And at the center of the chamber, a hologram of Crucible 1 rotated slowly, its size dwarfing anything currently in existence. This cannot be," the Arthari High Scholar whispered. "The records were clear. Humanity began at the fringes. Post-ascension. Weak." A Jorian general snarled, mandibles twitching. "Your records are fiction. You have always feared the truth. We found ruins on Fek 6, human architecture, dated back before our star system was formed." "The humans are liars," hissed a Yalathi diplomat. "This is manipulation, propaganda." But then the transmission came. A live feed. From the Crucible fleet. Captain Thorne stepped into view. He didn't speak. He simply stared at them, eyes empty, posture still. And behind him, something shifted in the shadows. A presence. A form too large to be real. A war form. A sentient weapon from the First Flame's core vaults. 8 arms, bladed, silent, watching. Then Thorne spoke one line. "You erased us, but we never stopped watching." The feed cut. The Council erupted into chaos. The Crucible fleet's next destination was locked. The Zenth Abyss. An ancient region of dead space. No planets, no stars. Just cold black. No species dared explore it. Not because it was uninhabited. Because something was there. Something that had made entire scout fleets vanish without trace. That's where the Crucible ships were headed now, because the whispers were getting louder, and Thorne, Rael, could feel it. The unlight had returned, and this time it wasn't just humans that would suffer. The edge of the Zenth Abyss didn't look like much, just black space, cold and empty, but it wasn't real emptiness, not the kind that lived between stars. This darkness was wrong. Like something alive had crawled over the stars and smothered them. There was no light, no signal bounce, no echoes. The sensors didn't go blind. They went quiet. Like they were afraid to speak. Thorne stood at the forward command station of Crucible 1. eyes locked on the obsidian sea ahead. The hull shimmered with a barely visible energy field, the only thing protecting them from the abyss's full touch. His fingers curled around the edge of the console. He didn't breathe. Behind him, the fleet held formation. 4 titanic warships, once buried and silent, now gliding into the forbidden dead zone like they were coming home. Raynor entered, slow, silent. "You sure about this?" he asked, keeping his voice low. "The abyss isn't like the others. No species goes there. You know why?" Thorn didn't turn, because they remember what we buried here. "You keep saying, 'we,' like you were there." Thorn finally looked over his shoulder. "I think I was." The ship had changed him. That much was obvious. His muscles twitched now in stillness, like something under his skin moved without asking. His eyes had gone a shade darker, older, almost metallic. His dreams bled into his waking thoughts. He could hear the warships whispering to each other in a language he never learned but somehow understood. And worst of all, he could feel what was waiting in the abyss. Not just them. Not just the unlight. But what they left behind, the Zenth abyss, was a wound, not in space, not in time, in reality. Long ago, longer than anyone but the Crucible remembered, something had tried to erase this part of the galaxy. Not conquer it, not cleanse it, erase, like it had never existed. And the first flame had come here to stop it, not with diplomacy, not with warnings, with fire. It wasn't a battle, it was a massacre. The Empire of Man, before it fell, had unleashed weapons that didn't just kill, they unmade. They shattered memory, history, and matter. It had worked. Barely. But not forever. Now the memory of what they'd sealed in this place was waking, and it remembered him. They crossed the event threshold 20 minutes after system entry. All stars vanished from the rear view. Nothing but dark. Alarms didn't sound. Instead, the Crucible whispered directly into Thorn's skull. "Connection achieved. Vault signal reacquired. Do you feel them, Rail?" He swallowed. His throat was dry. "Yes," he said. "They're not dead." "No. They're dreaming of the fire." He closed his eyes. "I know." In the abyss, the warships moved like gods. The void bent around them, not because of speed, but because of memory. They had been here before. They had killed here before. They had died here before. But the enemy wasn't gone. Not truly. The Crucible ships began activating deep systems, older than tech, older than thought, mechanisms designed to interact with the fabric of unreality. Some of the crew went mad just seeing them activate, screaming about light inside their teeth, voices in metal, their mother's face rotting behind their eyelids. 2 had to be locked in cryo to stop them from clawing their eyes out. And Thorn, he felt fine. That scared him more than anything else. They reached the Black Vault 40 hours after entry. It wasn't a structure. It was a tear. A hole in space, 15,000 kilometers wide, suspended in total silence. Around it, ancient satellite husks drifted in a perfectly circular formation, guardians that had long since powered down. Until Thorn arrived. Then, one by one, they blinked back to life. He stood on the Crucible's forward platform as the lights came on. "Why is it opening?" Raynor asked from behind him. "It recognizes me." "How? That thing's older than anything. It shouldn't even be possible." "It's not." "Then how?" Thorn turned slowly. "Because I opened it the first time." The vault split like a wound, tearing itself wider. And from inside came light, but not warm, not gold. This was silver light, hard and clean and filled with screaming things that had no mouths, light that felt like judgment. The Crucible pulsed. Vault 9 access confirmed, Crucible protocol initiated, command rail acknowledged, deploying fire units. Thorn felt something behind his eyes snap. Pain lanced through his skull, but it was good pain. Familiar, like remembering how to breathe after drowning. The ships unfolded. Not externally, internally. Hidden bays long dormant opened, racks of long-dead machines activated, war forms, each 2 stories tall, humanoid and faceless, stepped forward and launched into the black. No weapons on their arms. They were the weapons, and they were hungry. Inside the vault, things moved. Not fast, not sudden. Just deliberate. Shapes not made for this reality began to slip through the edges. Not solid, not shadow, just wrong. And Thorn felt them reach for him, not with hands, but with memory. He felt the past crash into him all at once. The final day of the First Empire, his ship, the crown of ash, burning, his hand on the crucible core, his generals begging him not to activate it, and his voice, steady and cold, saying only, "Better that we burn than let them win." And then, light. Then silence. He gasped, falling to his knees. Blood leaked from his nose, ears, and eyes. Raynor rushed forward, but the AI stopped him with a force field. "Let him remember," it said. Thorn screamed once, and when he stood again, he wasn't shaking. He wasn't afraid. He was awake. The vault spoke. Not in language, in pain. Every crew member dropped. Some vomited. Others bled. Some died. But Thorn stood still, and he heard the message clearly. "We remember the fire." The Unlight had been waiting for Thorn, waiting for the crucible, waiting for Rael to return so they could finish what was started. The vault began to birth them. One by one, they emerged from the tear. Not ships, not creatures, errors in space, creatures of memory and broken cause. They didn't fly, they floated, didn't communicate, just radiated hate. Thorn gave the order. "Burn them." The crucible ships responded like hunting dogs off a leash. They didn't fire missiles, no plasma, no lasers. They used memory, a concept weapon, a beam that turned the enemy into what they used to be. And if they had never been real, they collapsed instantly into nothing. The Unlight shrieked. Reality folded. The vault trembled. Raynor watched the madness unfold on the view screen, mouth dry, hands shaking. "How are we doing this?" he whispered. Thorn didn't answer. He didn't have to, because deep down he knew. They were using him as a conduit. Every memory he regained, every scar, every buried command was a key, and the crucible was finally unlocking. For 7 hours, the fleet purged the vault, and when the last Unlight was erased, Thorn descended, alone, into the heart of the tear. The crew begged him not to. He ignored them, because at the bottom of the vault, beneath the ruins of what used to be the First Empire's final stand, was the crucible core, a sphere the size of a city, still active, still warm, still waiting for him. He stepped onto its surface, and it opened. Inside, there was no metal, no machine, just a throne, and a corpse, his corpse. Perfectly preserved, crowned, eyes open, smiling, and in its hand, his own command sigil, forged in a time before time, pulsing faintly with ancient light. He reached forward, and the core whispered, "You are Rael. You are flame. We are not dead. We were only dreaming." The chamber was death silent. No engine hum, no warform stomp, no AI whispers, just cold. It wasn't the temperature. The core had no temperature. It was the kind of cold that crept under skin, under thought. The kind of cold you felt when you were in the presence of something that should not exist anymore. Thorn stood before his own corpse, perfectly preserved. Upright on a throne of gleaming obsidian that rose from the core's heart like a mountain of memory. The corpse's eyes were open, gray, dead, and sharp. It was him. Not just similar, exact. Down to the burn scar behind the left ear, down to the sliver of missing tooth from a bar fight on Vega 9, down to the same tired anger set in the brow. Only this version wore armor older than Earth's orbit. The sigil in its hand glowed a sickly gold, the crown of command. Thorn felt like throwing up, but he couldn't move, couldn't look away. He stepped forward, each bootstep echoing across the vast emptiness. No guards, no AI, no traps, because none were needed. This wasn't a tomb, it was a mirror. "You've returned," said a voice, his own voice, only older, deeper, without breath. He froze. The corpse hadn't moved. The lips were still. The voice came from the room itself. "I didn't think I would." "You didn't." The chamber pulsed softly, like a heartbeat, like a question waiting to be asked. "You died here," Thorn whispered. "You sealed the vault." "Yes." "You killed billions." "Yes." "Why?" The corpse's eyes gleamed, just once, a trick of the light, a spark of memory. Because it was the only way to stop them. The Crucible core was more than a vault. It was a memory engine, a living record encoded in quantum permanence. The version of Thorn that had died here, Rail, had left a copy of his thoughts, his logic, his sins, burned into the stone and steel around him. Not a mind, not a soul. Just truth. And now that Thorn had returned, the core was opening that truth like a locked box. Images flooded his head. The final war, the Star Eaters rising from the edge of unspace, consuming suns, erasing entire histories from reality, not just killing, but unwriting. They had no ships, no needs, no fear, only hunger. The first flame had been the last empire standing. And Rail, its supreme commander, a man with no gods, no morals, only fire. "I chose extinction," the voice said, "because surrender meant becoming like them, less than memory." Thorn shook his head. "So you lit the galaxy on fire?" "No, I lit us on fire, so they would choke on the ashes." He clenched his fists. "You could have saved something." "I did." Thorn paused. "What?" The voice grew colder. "You." The sigil in the corpse's hand pulsed brighter. Thorn reached out, slowly. He didn't want it, but he needed it. The moment his fingers touched the hilt, the core erupted. The world vanished. He stood in a burning sky. Ash rained from above like snow. Cities crumbled in silence. Massive warforms, glowing with dying light, fought shadows that didn't cast silhouettes. Whole fleets fired into nothing. Screams filled the void. Humans, aliens, machines. This was not a memory. This was a warning. Rael stood beside him. Not the corpse. A living version. Armor glowing, sword drawn. "You think you're different from me," Rael said. "I am." "No, you're just earlier." They stood atop a broken world. Thorn could see wreckage stretching into the horizon. Earth? Maybe. Or what was left of it. The stars were wrong. The sky bled light in unnatural colors. "This was the last stand," Rael said. "The Star Eaters were here, eating our past, tearing us from the bones of history." Thorn looked around. "What happened?" "I stopped them." "At what cost?" Rael looked at him, cold and steady. "You're here, aren't you?" The sky shattered like glass, and Thorn was back in the core. The sigil burned in his hand now, a brand. He looked up, and the corpse was gone. No throne, no remains. Just a reflection of himself on the black floor. He wasn't alone. Behind him, Raynor stood at the edge of the platform, gun in hand, shaking like a man standing before God. "You've been down here too long," he said, voice brittle. "You're changing." "I'm remembering." "Bullshit," Raynor snapped. "You walk different, talk different. The crew doesn't trust you anymore. I don't trust you. Thorn said nothing. Whatever that thing gave you, it isn't you. Thorn looked him in the eye, and for the first time since this began, he smiled. Maybe that's the point. Back aboard the Vagrant Sun, chaos had begun. 2 crew members had locked themselves in a maintenance bay, refusing to leave. One of them kept screaming about stars whispering inside his skull. Another had gone catatonic. The Crucible's warforms remained deployed. Silent and still around the ship like statues of judgment. They didn't speak, but they watched. Waiting. The AI came online the moment Thorn stepped onto the bridge. Crucible protocol complete. Fleet now at full operational capacity. Shall we initiate Exodus Directive? What's that? Raynor asked, pacing nervously. Thorn didn't answer, because he knew. The Exodus Directive was not about escape. It was war. Total war. The galaxy wasn't ready. The Arthari Senate was in freefall. Splinter factions forming, civil war bubbling. The Jarian clans had begun mobilizing fleets toward Terran space, desperate to stop what they called the rebirth of fire. Earth had gone dark. No signals in 3 days. Some said a Crucible ship had landed. Others said it never left. One thing was certain. Thorn's signal was spreading. And it wasn't just humans responding. Buried tech, ancient constructs, weapons no longer supposed to exist. They were waking up. The Crucible fleet began moving again. Not at random. To coordinates embedded in the sigil's memory. Locations that no longer appeared on maps. Thorn watched silently as the first set loaded. A system labeled only Karnax 0. He recognized it instantly. That was where they built the flame, where humanity had once forged its empire, the birthplace of the First War, the place no species dared go, because Karnax was cursed, and now it was calling him home. Raynor approached him later, quieter this time. "I've seen what's out there," he said. "The unlight, the vaults, what you pulled out of that throne." Thorn didn't respond. "But I need to know something," Raynor continued. "Are you still you? Or are we following a dead man wearing your face?" Thorn looked at him, tired. "I wish I knew. That's not good enough." "No," Thorn said. "It isn't." Raynor exhaled sharply. "So what now?" Thorn stared into the stars, at the black ahead, and the fire behind. "Now we burn the lies out of this galaxy." Karnax 0 wasn't marked on any modern star chart, not because it was hidden, but because it was deleted. 100,000 years ago, the first flame had called Karnax its crown jewel. It wasn't a planet, or a moon, or a station. It was a forging world, a planetary construct built entirely to house and birth war, a sphere of blackened steel and molten infrastructure orbiting a long dead white dwarf. There had once been 3 suns here. Now there was only one, collapsing inward in slow, eternal silence. Gravity pulsed like a wounded heart. Radiation blanketed the system. No species ventured near it, not because of danger, but because of what they felt. Regret. And now Thorn was bringing war back home. The Crucible fleet exited fold space like gods tearing open the edge of reality. They didn't shimmer. They didn't roar. They appeared, with no warning, no pulse trail, no signature. Raynor stared at the world spinning slowly ahead on the forward display. His jaw clenched involuntarily. His hands shook. "That's not a planet," he said softly. "No," Thorn replied. "It's a weapon." The surface of Karnax 0 writhed with ancient systems flickering to life. Massive plating shifted, exposing dormant atmospheric burns. Vast tower spires began rising from the core, extending miles above the planet's surface, and in the center of it all, what looked like a single eye, slowly rotating open. A welcome, or a warning. Receiving signal, the AI reported. Multiple sources, human genetic code detected, originating from Karnak's surface. Raynor turned sharply. Wait, humans down there? Thorn was already moving. Prepare a drop. You're not going down there alone. No, he said, grabbing the sigil and locking it to his chest. I'm not going alone. They deployed in a crucible skiff, flanked by 2 warforms. The descent took less than 5 minutes, faster than any drop team had ever dared attempt. The atmosphere was toxic, a soup of ash and electromagnetic interference, yet the crucible's shielding adapted to it like memory returning to muscle. The skiff landed at the base of a black cathedral rising from Karnax's crust. The structure groaned as they approached, as if the metal itself was breathing. And at the entrance, waiting in the dark, were people. Humans. Clad in armor nearly identical to Thorn's, their faces were scarred, eyes glowing faintly with gold circuits tracing under the skin. Each carried a weapon older than language. The tallest stepped forward. She didn't raise her weapon. She bowed. Rael, she said. You're late. He didn't recognize her, but he knew her. Not by face, not by name, by the feeling. Like a chapter of his own mind had been locked away and suddenly thrown wide open. You were part of the fleet, he said. She nodded. I was Flameborn, vanguard of the first Crucible front. I saw you die at the siege of Kolvax. You saw someone die wearing my armor. They downloaded me into the vault. We've waited since then, for the signal. For you. Raynor stepped forward, stunned. How many of you are there? The woman smiled faintly. Not enough. But more than you'd like. Inside the cathedral, Karnax pulsed like a living organ. Gold veins of light ran through the black floor, leading them deeper into the structure. The Flameborn introduced herself as Nira. She led them through chambers filled with relics, crucible blades, memory drives, even the exoskeletal remains of pre-fleet humans, taller, more refined, built for war. These were our ancestors, Nira explained. We devolved to survive. The fire was too much to carry, but it remembers, through blood, through pain. Thorn paused at one display, a single blade floating mid-air, humming softly. Why now? He asked. Why wake up now? Nira stopped walking. Her eyes grew distant. Because they're waking up too. They reached the core of the structure, an atrium made of crystallized black matter, lit from within. Inside floated a map of the galaxy, shimmering in 3 dimensions. Dozens of red points pulsed along the edge of known space. Thorn stared at them. Those are unlight breaches, Nira nodded. They're testing the edge again, poking the wounds, and this time, there's no Empire to hold them back. But why not just broadcast a warning? We can't, she said. They've infected the neural layer of reality itself. Transmissions don't carry through uncorrupted. The moment we try, the message turns into static. Or madness. Thorn clenched his fists. So we let the galaxy sleep while the sky dies? Nira looked at him. No, we let you wake it up. Outside, Karnax began to shift. The Crucible warships responded in kind, adjusting orbit, feeding the Forge world fresh energy from their core reactors. Massive rings unfolded from beneath Karnax's surface, ancient production lines, fusion cradles, and long-dead thought forges beginning to spin for the first time in millennia. You're rebuilding, Raynor whispered, eyes wide. Nira smiled. No, we're remembering. Back on the fleet, something changed. Crew members aboard Vagrant Sun began experiencing flashes of memory. Not theirs, old memories, dreams of weapons they'd never seen, names they didn't recognize, orders they had no context for yet understood. Some passed out, some vomited. One stood at a console and muttered, The Forge is awake. He's back. He's really back. And the war forms, they knelt, all of them, not to the AI, not to the planet, but to Thorn. In the Karnak's Forge Hall, Thorn approached the central altar. There, embedded in a pedestal of starbone, lay a crown. Not decorative, not royal, a command node, the symbol of full control over the Crucible protocol. Nira spoke softly beside him. We buried it here the day the stars screamed. No one was meant to claim it again. But you came back. You found us. The Crucible remembers you. Thorn stared at the crown. Putting it on changes everything. She didn't disagree. You'll stop being who you were, piece by piece. Rail will overwrite you, until there's nothing left but the fire. Thorn was silent. Then he reached forward. His fingers brushed the cold metal, and the galaxy trembled. He saw it all. Again. Not just the past, the future. Millions of lives blinking out like candlelight. The unlight consuming whole systems. Children forgotten. Planets howling. He saw Earth fall. He saw Raynor dead. He saw the vagrant sun burning. And he saw himself. Standing at the edge of a burning universe, sword in hand, armor cracked, alone, again. He pulled his hand back. The crown stayed cold. Nira's voice was soft. We will follow you, Rail, whether you wear it or not. He looked at her. At the war forms, at Raynor, then at the stars. Not yet, he said. I need to remember why we burned before I light the fire again. That night, Karnax pulsed with ancient drums. Machines thousands of years old screamed back into existence. Cradles of war lit up across the Forge world, pulling ore from dead moons, rebuilding forgotten fleets. And Thorn stood alone on a platform above the atrium, watching it all. Behind him, Raynor approached. You could have taken it, he said. I know. But you didn't. I'm not ready. Raynor crossed his arms. You sure about that? The rest of them think you are. Thorn didn't answer at first. Then, what if I turn into him? Rail? He nodded. Raynor snorted. You're halfway there already. Thorn turned to him, quiet. Would you stop me? Raynor didn't blink. I'd try. Thorn smiled. Good. The Crucible AI returned to full awareness. New signal detected. Long range, source unknown, distress tone embedded within. Thorn narrowed his eyes. Location? Sector 9F, uncharted, signal carrying Terran genetics, and Crucible encryption. Thorn froze. Another survivor? Raynor leaned forward. Or a trap. Or both, Thorn said. Either way, it's calling me. Nira stepped from the shadows. We'll prepare a ship. Thorn nodded. Tell the flame to stay hot. Karnax will burn again soon. As the Crucible fleet realigned, shifting in orbit above the Forge world, one last pulse from the planet's core shot into deep space. It was not a broadcast. It was a summons, and far, far away, beyond dead stars and broken systems, something answered. The stars in Sector 9F were wrong. Not because of age or drift. They were positioned in ways that defied known orbital mechanics, like someone had moved them or built them. Entire constellations twisted into geometric patterns, vast mathematical shapes so old that no AI dared analyze them. The Crucible fleet approached slowly. Only 3 ships came. Thorn had left Karnax burning bright behind him, its forge relit, its sleeping titans stirring. He brought Crucible 1, the vagrant sun, and a smaller warform transport vessel called Obsidian Wake. Each fully armed, each ready to erase whatever waited beyond the edge. But Thorn wasn't ready for what he found. The source of the signal wasn't a planet, it wasn't a station, it was a man. He stood alone on a drifting hulk, a shattered capital ship older than any known design, its hull cracked in half, venting frozen gases in lazy arcs of starlight. A single beacon flashed from its wrecked bridge, a crucible-coated distress loop that hadn't been used since the last days of the Empire. They scanned it 3 times. Same result. 1 life form aboard. Human DNA. Neural signature 88% match to Crucible command level hierarchy. 8%. Thorne watched the readout from the deck of the drop skiff. Raynor stood beside him, arms folded, brow furrowed. "You sure about this?" he asked. Thorne didn't answer. He was already buckled in. They docked manually. The wreck was massive, at least 3 kilometers long. From the outside, it resembled a beast more than a ship. All jagged angles and scorched plating, its hull scorched with battle damage Thorne didn't recognize. Not from alien tech. Not even from the unlight. From something else. Inside, the corridors were silent. No power, no bodies. No AI, only frost. And something else. A hum. Just under the skin. Not in the ears. In the blood. Raynor walked with his rifle raised. "This doesn't feel right." Thorne agreed, but he moved forward anyway. They found him in the central command chamber, alone, sitting in the captain's chair. Still, he was tall, taller than Thorne by a full foot, broad shoulders, dark skin laced with thin golden veins, like someone had poured crucible code under his flesh. His eyes were open, watching, and when he stood, every warform in the skiff glitched for half a second. Thorne didn't speak first. The man did. "Rail," he said. His voice like iron scraped across rust. "You were slower than I expected?" Raynor aimed his rifle. "Back up. Now." The man ignored him. He stepped down from the platform, barefoot on the cold metal floor. "I sent the signal 2 years ago," he said. "You just heard it now. That means the unlight is spreading deeper than we calculated." Thorne stared at him. "Who are you?" The man smiled faintly. "I was you. Once." Then he extended his hand. "I am Commander Aaron Vale, Flameborn, Crucible Loyalist, Sector Commander for the Dying Front, and the last man to hold the line before the final silence." Thorne didn't move, but the pain behind his eyes began again. Another memory was waking up. Aaron walked with them through the dead corridors of his ship. It wasn't a vessel. It was a tomb. Every corridor was sealed. Every warform locked in cryostasis, systems powered down to conserve energy for the bridge. "I've been alone for 40,000 years, he said casually. "One last holding post, watching this sector, watching for movement." "You should have been dead," Raynor said. Aaron didn't deny it. "I was, technically. Crucible regeneration protocols kept me alive. Barely. They fused my neural map to the ship's core. I wasn't awake. Not until you activated Karnax." Thorne looked at him carefully. "And now you are." Aaron turned. "Yes, and I remember what you forgot." They stood in a sealed chamber, lined with screens showing static, old Crucible data cores, maps of star systems no longer in existence. Aaron tapped one of them. "This world," he said. "Lundakar. It was the last safe haven. A fortress world. We held it for 600 years. Until they came." He looked at Thorne. "You gave the order to burn it. Do you remember?" Thorne clenched his jaw. "No." "Good. It broke you." The ship had secrets. Even now, barely powered, it whispered to Thorne in fragments. Old access codes, forgotten weapon names, rejected Crucible experiments. But something else lay buried in its databanks. A message. Aaron led them to it. A black obelisk in a sealed vault, surrounded by ancient scripts, inert drones, and warnings etched in languages not even the Crucible AI could decipher. Aaron spoke softly as he approached it. "They left this behind, before they died, before you wiped them out. Not the unlight, the ones who came before even us, the architects. Thorn stepped forward. Why? Because they knew what we were becoming. The obelisk pulsed when Thorn approached. Pain shot through his skull. Visions, not of war, but of creation. He saw massive beings forging stars with their hands, crafting life like tools, experiments, generations of intelligent life built, released, and erased. A cycle of birth and destruction. He saw humanity, not as evolution, but as design, created for war, unleashed when the architects lost control. Thorn fell to one knee, blood dripping from his nose. Raynor moved to grab him, but Aaron held out a hand. No, let him see it. The truth hit Thorn like a knife. They weren't natural. The first flame hadn't risen from Earth or some mythic beginning. It was built. Humanity was the last weapon made by gods who lost faith in their own creations, designed to destroy, to rebuild, and to forget. He came to slowly. The obelisk powered down. The pain faded, but the rage remained. You knew, he said, staring at Aaron. All this time, you knew. Aaron didn't argue. I had 4,000 years to study the message, 4,000 years to learn what we were, and why they tried to bury us. Thorn stood, voice shaking. So we're nothing but tools. No, Aaron said calmly. We're the last tool, and the galaxy is broken again. He stepped closer. That's why I sent the signal. Not just to find you, but to join you, to finish what we started. Back aboard Crucible 1, the fleet began receiving data dumps from Aaron's derelict vessel. Maps of old fronts, coordinates of dormant flame-borne units scattered across uncharted sectors. Crucible caches never found by modern civilization. Thorn stared at the reports. 10,000 potential survivors. 97 Crucible warships buried. A dozen Forge worlds waiting in silence. And one final directive. Burn the lie. Light the galaxy again. Raynor cornered him later. You believe him? Thorn didn't respond. He shows up after 40,000 years with all the answers, and we're just supposed to take his word? He didn't lie. You don't know that. I felt it, Thorn said, voice rough. In the obelisk, in the ship. He's like me, older, but like me. That doesn't mean he's right. Thorn looked out at the black stars ahead. I don't care if he's right. I care if he's ready. That night, Thorn stood on the observation deck of Crucible 1 as the stars twisted slowly above. He held the sigil in his hand. The map had changed. More red dots now. More breach points. The unlight was moving faster. The architect's old constructs were waking up again, some broken, some mad, and somewhere deep in the galactic dark. The final vault still pulsed, unopened, waiting. He exhaled. Time to wake the rest. The campaign began in silence. No fanfare, no declarations, no fleet-wide announcements. Just Thorn, Aaron, and a forged list of Crucible designations, each representing a dormant warship, buried Forge world, or flame-borne sleeper cell lost to time. There were 167 names on that list, 167 chances to rebuild a war that was never meant to be remembered. The Crucible AI called it the Reclamation Sequence. Thorn called it Resurrection. The first 3 sites were quiet. In Sector 4 Alpha, they unearthed a buried hangar beneath the surface of a moon, long since overgrown by jungle. A single Flameborn, designation Hell Varn, sat frozen in stasis inside a memory core, armor still etched with the sigils of Ryle's final fleet. He wept when he woke. In the Valix Drift, they found an entire Crucible dreadnought parked inside a hollow asteroid, engines dry, AI dead, but its hull still held names carved by dying soldiers. Most of the crew had been lost to entropy. 2 survived, their minds fractured but intact enough to recognize the sigil Thorn wore on his chest. They kneeled without question. By the sixth sight, the fleet had grown. 10 Flameborn, 2 dreadnoughts, 4 relic frigates, a dozen warforms rebuilt. But at the 7th, everything changed. Site 7, Dylus Prime. Once a Flameborn command node, built into the crust of a shattered planetoid orbiting a black dwarf. Coordinates hidden beneath 3 layers of encrypted crucible data. Aaron had his doubts. They shouldn't have made it this long, he muttered, as the skiff dropped into the atmosphere. This site was cut off during the 3rd collapse. There were no survivors on record. Thorn stood silent beside him. They brought 3 warforms, 1 AI tech, and a crucible medic. Raynor stayed behind this time, Thorn had asked. He didn't say why. Raynor didn't argue. They entered the command vault through a fracture in the planet's outer crust. The descent was tight, claustrophobic, lightless. Aaron led. Thorn followed. The halls bore signs of ancient battle, melted plating, claw marks, sealed airlocks with desperate messages scratched in dying hands. They got through. Lockdoor C-17. No gods, only flame. At the end of the corridor, they found the door. It was still closed. The crucible sigil pulsed as Thorn approached. Access granted. The vault hissed open. And what they found inside wasn't salvation. It was madness. The Flameborn had survived. Barely. 17 of them, encased in half-functioning armor, their bodies augmented beyond recognition. Some were missing limbs. Others had fused with the wall, still breathing, still aware. And they were laughing, not with joy, not even from madness, from hatred. Aaron froze. No. One stepped forward, eyes burning gold and black, his armor cracked and weeping ancient code. "Rail," he rasped. "Return to finish what you started?" Thorn stepped forward. "What happened to you?" "You happened," the Flameborn hissed. "You lit the galaxy on fire. Then you left us to burn in the dark." Another voice, female, echoed from the side of the chamber. "We waited for your orders, and when none came, we made our own." Thorn's fingers hovered near his sidearm. Aaron stepped in. "We're rebuilding, reforging. There's still a war to win." "You think we care?" the first Flameborn spat. "You think the crucible matters anymore?" He stepped closer, armor grinding, limbs twitching with artificial spasms. "We watched the stars die while the rest of you slept in metal tombs. And now you want us back like nothing happened?" Thorn spoke slowly. "You don't have to come back, but don't stand in the way." The man smiled and pulled the trigger. The first shot tore into Aaron's shoulder, sending sparks and blood into the air. The vault exploded into violence. Thorn dove left, drawing his sidearm in one smooth motion. Warforms moved instantly, intercepting, shielding, returning fire. The corrupted Flameborn split into 2 teams, moving like shadows through the vault corridors. Thorn didn't hesitate. He charged. The fighting was brutal. These weren't rookies or broken survivors. They were Crucible elite, driven mad by isolation and betrayal. Every move was precise. Every strike aimed to kill. Thorn moved through them like a phantom. His armor absorbed most of the damage, his reflexes enhanced by the crucible bond. But it wasn't skill that kept him alive. It was rage. He wasn't angry they turned. He was angry they weren't wrong. He'd left them. The old Rail. The one who chose fire over loyalty. The one who gave up on his brothers and sisters to stop a larger threat. And now that sin had come back to kill him. Aaron was bleeding heavily, his systems overloaded. He dragged himself into cover near a data terminal, cursing as 2 Flameborn closed in. One raised a blade. Thorn tackled him from behind. They fell together, slamming into the metal floor. Thorn's fist cracked the attacker's helmet, exposing rotted flesh and teeth sharpened by time. "I remember you," the man gasped. "You told us we were chosen." Thorn drove the blade into his throat. "You still are," he whispered. Minutes later, it was over. 9 dead. 5 incapacitated. 3 escaped into the vaults, vanishing into the dark. Thorn stood over the broken bodies, armor scorched, blood slick on his hands. Aaron leaned against the wall, panting. "They're not the only ones like this," he said quietly. "I should have known. Not everyone wanted to be reborn." Thorn looked down at one of the corpses. The man had carved a word into his chest plate. "Ashen," he read it aloud. Aaron nodded grimly. "That's what they call themselves now." Thorn straightened. "Then we burned them." Back aboard Crucible 1, Raynor met them in the medbay. His eyes went wide at Aaron's injuries. "What the hell happened?" "They broke," Thorn said. Raynor didn't ask who. He saw it in Thorn's face. He just said, "How many more like them are on that list?" Thorn looked down at the datapad, then back up. "All of them." That night, Thorn didn't sleep. He sat in the memory chamber, alone. The Crucible showed him records, the old Rails decisions, who he left behind, who he sacrificed, who he let rot in the name of strategy and victory. He watched it all, didn't look away, didn't flinch. Then he looked down at his hands and whispered, "I won't be you. I'll finish your war, but I'll do it my way." The Crucible pulsed softly, and the stars outside shifted. The hunt began in blood. Their names weren't on any Crucible list. The Ashen had erased themselves. They had purged their command codes, severed their bonds with the flame, and carved out new sigils, broken, inverted versions of the Crucible seal, etched into their armor like defiance made flesh. They weren't hiding. They were waiting. Thorn stood on the war table deck of Crucible 1, a faint red haze washing over his face as he stared at the star maps. 37 confirmed Ashen signals, 11 systems corrupted, 4 Crucible relics destroyed before the fleet could respond. And in each location, the same message left behind, burned into the walls in deep, gouged lettering. No gods, no flame, only forgotten fire. Raynor watched from the side, arms folded tight. "They're not just rogue soldiers," he muttered. "They're building something." Thorn didn't look at him. "A resistance?" "No," Raynor said, shaking his head. "A cult." Aaron stepped into the chamber, his new shoulder implant still twitching from the last mission. His voice was low, grim. "They're not just flameborn anymore. Whatever they found in the void, it changed them." Thorn turned to him. "How?" Aaron hesitated. Then he said the word that hadn't been spoken aloud since the vault opened. "They're using unlight." It didn't make sense. The flame and the unlight were opposites. The Crucible had been forged to destroy the Star Eaters, not merge with their essence. The war had been total, sacred, binary, light versus dark, existence versus extinction. But the Ashen weren't loyal to memory. They were loyal to survival. They had taken in the enemy, let it whisper in their minds, let it change them, not possessed, not infected, twisted, voluntarily. And that made them more dangerous than anything Thorn had faced so far. Because they still remembered how the Crucible worked. They just didn't care anymore. The first strike was surgical, a silent moon in the Elixir Rift, once home to a flame-born repair outpost. Crucible recon scans showed movement, 10, maybe 12 Ashen inside. Thorn deployed a kill team. Aaron led the assault. It should have been clean. It wasn't. The Crucible troops breached the outer ring of the station without resistance. The doors were open, the lights were still on. Inside they found ash piles, bones, old crucible banners torn down and replaced with black flags woven from armored flesh, and words written in smeared blood along the walls. "He burns too bright. Soon he will blind himself." Aaron activated thermal, picked up faint movement. They pressed deeper, room by room, until they reached the command center. And what they found wasn't a garrison, it was a temple, a shrine to the forgotten fire. At the center of the chamber stood an ashen war priest, covered head to toe in black crucible armor, gold lines etched with unlight runes, face completely masked. He turned slowly, held out his hands, and said one word. "Rail." Back aboard the vagrant sun, Thorn watched the footage. He leaned forward slowly as the priest knelt on screen before the crucible troops and whispered something in a broken language, then detonated. Not with fire, not with explosives, with memory. The entire kill team dropped instantly. They didn't die. They just forgot who they were, why they were there, what they were fighting for. Thorn watched in horror as the footage cut out, static pouring across the screen like a scream that had nowhere to go. Raynor shut the terminal down. Aaron looked over, jaw tight. They've weaponized the past. The Crucible AI had no record of the language used by the Ashen Priest. It wasn't alien. It wasn't even pre-collapse. It was pre-creation, a raw, anti-cognitive script buried in the metaphysical code of existence, something meant to erase understanding itself. Thorn stared at the simulation in silence. "They're not just hunting us," he muttered. "They're rewriting the war. The Ashen didn't use fleets. They used corruption. Every world they touched was left dripping in psychic residue. Unlight spires grown from the ground like tumors. Crucible relics defaced and reprogrammed to loop false memories. Survivors found wandering their cities couldn't speak, couldn't remember their own names. But they all said one thing. The flame lies. And then they screamed. At Site 12, Thorn found something worse. A memory-forged crucible ship, one of their own, converted into a carrier for Ashen warforms. But these weren't machines. They were humans, bodies hollowed out, flameborn who had allowed unlight to leak into their bone marrow. They didn't speak. They whispered. When Thorn stepped aboard with a full squad, they activated, singing a single tone that made 3 of his men collapse, bleeding from the ears. He fought his way out, left the ship in orbit, and gave the order, "Burn it all." The war was changing, and so was he. Nira met him on the command balcony above the Crucible Forge deck. The fleet had grown again, new ships refitted, fresh flameborn awakened. But none of them could stop what was coming. "They're not trying to win," she said quietly. Thorn didn't look at her. "No. They're trying to make us forget the war ever happened." "Worse," he muttered. "They're trying to make us believe it was never worth fighting." One night, Thorn stood alone in his private chamber. No armor, no weapons, just silence. He stared at himself in the mirror. The man staring back looked more like Rail now. Lines sharper, eyes colder, presence heavier. He wasn't becoming someone else. He was becoming what the galaxy needed. The Ashen wanted the old Rail to return. But they didn't realize he already had. The Crucible fleet launched a system-wide cleanse across sectors 10 through 13. No diplomacy, no warnings. Flameborn teams entered each site, retrieved surviving relics, and destroyed anything tainted by the Ashen. But the Ashen adapted faster. They began ambushing Crucible recovery teams with shadows, constructs of past memory made solid, echoes of dead Flameborn, programmed to confuse and slow down Thorn's forces. At one site, Raynor watched helplessly as one of their medics was pulled into a memory loop, reliving the day his family died over and over until his heart stopped. Aaron had to burn the man's brain to stop the screaming. They were losing ground, not in territory, in truth. Then came the signal. A crucible distress code, level black, only ever used by one designation, Sovereign class. There had only been 2 Sovereign class Flameborn ever built. Rail was one, the other had vanished during the war. But now he was calling Thorn, and his voice sounded nothing like it used to. The coordinates led to a dead world, Vekros, a planet stripped of atmosphere by unlight entropy centuries ago. No cities, no life, no signal except a single transmission loop. The fire is a lie. Come see what it cost you. Thorn ordered full fleet lockdown. No one followed him. Not this time. He took the Obsidian Wake alone. No escorts, no armor, just the sigil. And his rage. As he descended toward the blackened surface of Vekros, the stars around him began to flicker. Not blink. Pulse, like eyes, watching, waiting. And in his head, a voice. Calm, cold, full of betrayal. You could have saved us, Rail, but you chose to be the sword instead of the shield. Thorn didn't speak aloud, but he thought the words hard enough to bleed. I chose what had to be done. The voice answered, Then let's see if you'll do it again, when it's someone you can't kill. Vekros was dead. No atmosphere, no magnetosphere, no light, just ash and broken stone beneath a sky that never turned. A graveyard planet, stripped bare by entropy waves during the last days of the Unlight War. The data said there'd never been life here. No colonies, no crucible presence, no records at all. But Rail remembered. Even before the skiff touched down, Thorn knew where to land. Not because of coordinates, because of gravitational memory, the subtle pull in his bones, the vibration in the deepest part of him. Like a compass tuned to something buried beneath the stone. He stepped out alone. The winds were silent. But his past was screaming. There was no structure, no temple, no fortress, just a ruin half buried in the rock, ancient crucible architecture torn in half by time. The entrance was warped, the alloy doors melted into jagged teeth. Thorn walked through without hesitation. His boots crunched bone dust. He didn't draw his weapon. He didn't need to. He could feel the second sovereign watching him. The interior of the ruin opened into a vast chamber carved into the planet's crust, lightless, featureless. At its center, a single obsidian throne, more monolith than chair, jagged, broken, but still radiating crucible command codes, and sitting upon it, a man. Sovereign class. Alive. Thorn stopped 20 meters away. The man stood. He was older than Thorn, broader in the shoulders, his armor scorched and patched, marked with symbols that no longer belonged to any Flameborn house. His eyes burned silver blue, crackling with memory. His voice, when he spoke, was calm. Disappointed. It should have been me. Thorn didn't move. I don't remember your name. The man tilted his head slightly. You wouldn't. They erased it when they buried me. He stepped forward, slow, measured, armored footsteps ringing like judgment across the black stone. You were first, I was second. You bore the title of sovereign. I bore its weight. Thorn watched him, eyes hard. You called me here. Yes. Why? The sovereign stopped 3 meters away and smiled. To ask if you remember what you did to me. Memory tore open. Not like before. Not a flood. A surgical cut. Precise. Painful. Vekros, this world, hadn't always been dead. Once it had been the seat of the Sovereign Council, a body of 5 commanders beneath Rail, each with authority to control sectors of the Crucible Empire. When the war turned, when the Unlight began to win, Rail made a decision. Not all of the sovereigns agreed. One of them, this man, had stood against him. Not with words, with force. There had been a coup, a failed one. Rail had struck first, brought orbital fire down on the sovereign chamber. Killed 3 of the 5. This one survived, not by mercy, by accident, and he remembered everything. Thorn exhaled, slow. You betrayed the flame. I tried to save it. You sided with the Ashen. The Sovereign's voice sharpened. I watched you burn everything, Rail. I watched you erase cities just to deny them to the enemy. I watched you abandon soldiers who followed you to the edge of death. I begged you to stop. You tried to seize command. I tried to stop a monster. A long silence. Then Thorn said, You failed. The Sovereign nodded. So did you. The floor shook. Low. Rhythmic. Not mechanical. Not seismic. Breathing. From below. The Sovereign turned and gestured toward the far wall. A set of glyphs lit up. Unlight script fused with crucible geometry. A fusion of what should never have been mixed. And the Sovereign said, I made a better flame. Thorn stepped forward slowly, eyes locked on the glyphs. He couldn't understand them, but he could feel them. They weren't meant to be read. They were meant to be remembered. The Sovereign kept speaking. There was always something broken in the crucible. We were forged for war, not for mercy. We carried fire without wisdom. Every planet we touched, we burned. And when the unlight came, we fought it the only way we knew how, by burning ourselves too. Thorn said nothing. The Sovereign turned back to him. But what if there was another way? What if the unlight wasn't just a weapon, but a language? A ripple passed through the chamber. Reality bent slightly. Just a breath. Thorn clenched his fists. You made a pact. I made a choice. You infected Flameborn with that filth. I gave them freedom. You broke them. I gave them a reason not to follow you into the fire again. A door opened behind the throne. No sound. No hinges. Just sudden space, carved out of the rock like a secret that had always existed. The Sovereign walked toward it, spoke without turning. Come, Rail, see what your replacement looks like. He followed. Down a black corridor that curved without angles. Lightless. Yet Thorn saw everything, or thought he did. He wasn't sure anymore what parts of his perception were real. At the end of the corridor was a chamber of glass and bone, and in the center, a cradle. Inside it floated a figure, humanoid, young, eyes closed, skin traced with crucible code and unlight runes fused seamlessly, not corrupted, balanced, not man, not machine, not God, something new. The Sovereign spoke, his voice soft now. This is what we were meant to be. Thorn stared at the thing in the cradle. It looked like him. Not just resemblance, exactly. Down to the scars, the eyes, the jawline. But there was no soul behind those closed lids. Just power. Raw, uncontrolled, waiting. This is a weapon, Thorn said. It's the last sovereign, the other man replied. One who will never question, one who will never hesitate. One who remembers your victories, but not your failures. Thorn stepped back. No. You don't get to say no anymore. It's not alive. It doesn't have to be. It just has to win. The Sovereign moved faster than Thorn expected. In one smooth motion, he activated the glyphs embedded in his own armor, and the chamber lit with memory fire. Thorn was thrown back, slammed into the wall. The cradle began to open, the thing inside stirred, and the Sovereign's voice rose, thunderous. I will finish what you couldn't. Thorn rolled to his feet, coughing blood. He drew the sigil from his chest plate, slammed it into the ground. Crucible override activated. The chamber trembled. The Sovereign lunged, but Thorn was ready now. He ducked, pivoted, drove his shoulder into the other man's chest, sending him crashing into the cradle. The glass cracked. The clone inside opened its eyes. They were empty. Not evil. Not kind. Just blank. "Is this what you want?" Thorn shouted. "A world ruled by copies?" The Sovereign stood slowly, blood running from his mouth. "I want a galaxy that doesn't need to be burned again." Thorn raised his weapon. "Then you should have let me die." He fired. The blast tore through the Sovereign's chest. Armor split. Light escaped. Not fire. Not unlight. Memory. His body collapsed into shards of thought, images, moments, echoes of battles fought and lost. Thorn stood over them, chest heaving. The cradle began to power down. The clone floated there, inert again. He didn't destroy it. He turned away. Back aboard Crucible 1, Thorn said nothing as he removed his armor. Raynor met him on the deck. "You find what you were looking for?" Thorn didn't answer. He walked past him, stopped at the viewport, stared into the stars, and whispered, "We've been fighting the wrong war." The prisoner wouldn't stop smiling. He sat chained to the cold black interrogation slab inside Crucible 1's lower deck, wrists bound by memory-forged clamps, a collar of neural disruptors humming softly around his throat. But none of it mattered. His eyes gleamed with a kind of madness that wasn't unstable. It was chosen. Voluntary. He had been a Flameborn once. Now he was ashen, and he was proud. Thorn stood behind the observation glass, arms folded, watching him like one might study a bomb with no timer. Raynor leaned in beside him. "You sure this is worth it?" "No." "Then why are we keeping him alive?" Thorn's voice was ice. "Because corpses can't talk." They'd found him on Eason 5, a half-dead planet choked by unlight flora. The Ashen had been using it as a conversion site, turning captured civilians into living beacons, bleeding Crucible code into their bones until they shattered under psychic strain. Thorn's squad had stormed the site, all targets eliminated, except this one. He hadn't fought. He'd knelt, hands open, said only, "Take me to Rail." That alone had earned him a place in chains. Now he waited. For an audience. Thorn entered the chamber alone. The air inside was colder than the rest of the ship, filtered through triple-sealed gates meant to contain unlight traces. The prisoner looked up as the door slid open. His face was thin, eyes sharp, cruel. The Crucible tattoos on his neck had been burned out, replaced with black sigils that moved if you stared too long. He grinned. "Rail." Thorn didn't respond. He sat across from him, elbows on the table, silent. The prisoner cocked his head. "No threats? No interrogation protocol? No war form with a blade to my throat?" "You're not worth one." The man chuckled. "You were always good with words." Thorn narrowed his eyes. "We knew each other?" A pause. Then the prisoner leaned forward, expression growing quiet. "I was at Karnax, the original one, not the husk you found." Silence. "I was part of the Forge Choir." Thorn blinked once. The words punched something in his chest. Forge Choir. They were the builders, the engineers who sang command into metal, who used harmonic frequencies to program Crucible ships at the molecular level. Fewer than 30 of them had ever lived. "You died," Thorn muttered. The prisoner smiled faintly. "I did." His name had been Velen Drex. He'd served in the choir until the fall of the Second Flame, a prototype command wave that predated the Sovereign line. Thought dead when the front collapsed near the Tenebrous Cut. His name wasn't on any lists. His DNA had been purged from the archives. Yet here he was. Alive. Changed. Ashen. And with him, secrets. "I don't care about your betrayal," Thorn said, voice low. "I care about what you know." Valen didn't flinch. Then you should ask the right question. Thorn leaned forward. Where is the final vault? The air in the room changed, like the walls exhaled. Velen smiled wider. That's the one. The final vault was myth, rumored to be the last crucible site sealed before the fall. Not a cache, not a warship, a seed, a fragment of the original architect code, the foundational intelligence that had designed the first flame. It wasn't supposed to exist. Even Eron had doubted it, but the Ashen had spoken of it in their temples, whispered about it during their deaths, and Valen had seen it. He didn't give coordinates, not directly. Instead, he began to speak in a tone unlike any Thorn had heard before. Half song, half code, a dialect laced with crucible syntax, but twisted into something else. The AI monitoring the feed struggled to process it. Raynor, watching from the observation bay, stared as the data feeds broke into vertical script, looping back on themselves. "What is he doing?" he asked the technician beside him. The AI's voice responded coldly. "He's teaching the Crucible how to forget." Inside the chamber, Thorn rose to his feet. "Enough." Valen stopped mid-sentence. He tilted his head, that sick grin still on his face. "You feel it now, don't you?" Thorn's spine ached. His temples throbbed, not from pain, from memory, unbidden, surging, fractured. He saw a star breaking in half, light spilling out like a scream. He saw himself, standing at a dais of bone, telling the Forge Choir to build something unforgivable. Velen's voice pierced the moment like a dagger. "You ordered the vault sealed, but you didn't remember why." Raynor burst into the chamber seconds later, weapon drawn. "Thorn, pull back. The room's bleeding psychic current." Valen laughed, blood dripping from his nose. "Of course it is. We're near it now. Can't you hear it breathing?" He looked straight at Thorn and said, "The final vault isn't a place, it's a being." The air ruptured. A pressure wave sent Raynor and the tech flying. Alarms blared. The ship screamed with proximity warnings. And Valen began to sing. Thorn tackled him mid-note. They slammed to the floor. The table shattered. Thorn's hands closed around Velen's throat. But it wasn't rage driving him. It was fear. Because for a second, just 1 second, he had believed him. The prisoner was sedated and locked in a stasis cage immediately after. Aaron arrived 10 minutes later, fresh from the Crucible bridge. "You should have killed him on SN5. Thorn sat on the medbay floor, blood on his hands, the echo of Velen's voice still digging into his brain. "I needed answers." "You almost lost yourself for one." "Then we're even." Aaron knelt beside him. "I ran a spectrum scan. When he started singing, we got a spatial ping." Thorn looked up slowly. "Where?" Aaron's voice dropped. "Dead center of null sector. No known stars. No systems. Just cold." Thorn stood. Eyes hard. "The vault." The fleet prepared to move. Nira briefed the Flameborn squads. Aaron plotted the jump vectors. Raynor stood in silence as the jump drive charged, hands clenched, jaw tight. Thorn stood on the Crucible's deck alone, looking at the map projection of Null Sector. The deepest part of the void, where no light escaped. He thought of Valen's final words before sedation kicked in. "You can't destroy it. You can only choose what version of it survives." That night, Thorn slept. And in his dreams, the vault opened, not with keys, but with his voice, and inside, himself. Smiling, sitting on a throne of light and whispering, "Welcome home, Rail." Null Sector wasn't a place. It was a scar. The moment the Crucible fleet breached the event horizon, space itself screamed. There were no stars here, no gravity, no drift. Just blackness so absolute it didn't just absorb light, it ignored it. Crucible One's systems registered movement but couldn't calculate velocity. Thrusters fired into void and returned nothing. No pull, no resistance. Thorne stood on the bridge as the navigation screens distorted into spirals. Lines of data collapsed into themselves. The ship's AI, stable even through Karnax's awakening and the Ashen incursions, now whispered, "This is not space, this is decision." Aaron steadied himself against the tactical console. "The forge can't anchor." "I'm not surprised," Thorne muttered. The fleet was quiet. Too quiet. No comms chatter. No war form syncing. The Crucible techs reported static in their implants, even dreams bleeding into sensor feeds. "I think the fleet's hallucinating," Nira said from the secondary station. "It's not hallucination," Thorne replied. "It's remembering." She looked at him, eyes narrowing. "How would you know?" He didn't answer. Because he felt it too, like something under his skin was turning slowly. Something ancient and mechanical, designed not to kill or create, but to evaluate. The vault wasn't a vault, it was a being. And now that they'd come close enough, it was waking up. The pulse hit first. One single quiet wave. Not seismic, not energy, but something internal. Everyone aboard Crucible One gasped as their vision blurred, pupils dilated, heartbeats sinking in a low, unnatural rhythm. Raynor dropped to one knee, clutching his head. "Something's pushing into me," he grunted. "Let it," Thorne said. "What?" Thorne walked to the viewport. The stars were gone. Only one thing hung in the dark now. A sphere. At least 100,000 kilometers wide, made not of matter, but information. Every surface flickered like a live memory stream. Moments from human history, crucible wars, Earth's birth, death, rebirth again, all playing simultaneously, and in the center, a single glowing point. Heartbeat red, the Crucible AI registered it with one sentence. Source entity identified, Apex Intelligence 0001, designation, the Vault. The AI began choking on itself. Data collapsed, system crashes, even war forms buckled in place, joints locking. Crucible One began powering down automatically, as if bowing. The Vault had not spoken, but it was watching, and Thorne knew what it wanted. He turned to the crew. "Evacuate the bridge. Now." Aaron opened his mouth to protest. Stopped. He saw Thorne's face. Saw the way his eyes were shifting. Gold. And something else. He just nodded. "Clear the deck." Within minutes, Thorne stood alone. No crew, no weapons, only the sigil. He walked to the center of the bridge and waited. The vault responded instantly. The entire viewport went white, and then it changed. Into a room. Small, simple, a forge chamber, very old. Earth, maybe, or something pretending to be. There was a table, a single chair, and someone sitting in it. Another Thorne, no armor, no scars. Just a man in black, smiling, like he'd been waiting a long time. "Rael," he said softly. "You're not real," Thorne answered. "I'm the part of you that was chosen," the copy replied. "I'm what the architects built." The vault didn't use words. It used selves, versions of you. Projections built from your own genetic memory, fears, regrets, potential. This wasn't a simulation. This was truth, filtered through blood and memory and fire. "What is this?" Thorne asked. "A test," the copy said. "The last one. I've passed 1,000 already. Not this one. What's the point? To decide." "Decide what? If humanity should wake up?" The copy smiled wider. "Or stay buried." The table changed. On it sat two objects, a shard of crucible alloy, black, humming softly, and a glass vial filled with swirling white mist. The copy gestured. "Pick one." Thorn didn't move. What are they? The shard is command. The flame, as it was. Total control. You become what Rail used to be. No question, no hesitation. You'll win, but you won't come back. Thorn stared at the vial. And the other? A seed of something new. You'll lose the war. You'll fail to stop the Ashen, but the flame will evolve. Maybe not in your time. But eventually. Thorn stepped forward. Why now? Because you found the vault, the copy said. Because you remembered the truth. And what truth is that? The copy leaned forward. That we were never meant to last. Outside the projection, the Crucible fleet floated in total silence. Some flameborn wept without knowing why. Others stared at walls, seeing childhood memories flash behind their eyes. The vault was sifting through every soul, measuring them, comparing them, and they all waited for his decision. Inside the vision, Thorn picked up the shard. It vibrated instantly, sank into his hand. His eyes flared gold. He saw victory, fleets destroyed, Ashen burned, the galaxy silenced under one command again. Then he picked up the vial. It froze his skin. Soft. Cold. He saw life. People laughing, unknown futures, mistakes. Kindness, but also loss. Earth burning, Karnax dying again, the Crucible fading. Neither wins, he whispered. No, the copy agreed. That's the truth. There is no victory. Only legacy. Thorn looked up. Then I choose both. The room shattered. Light bled from every corner. Pain exploded in his chest. And suddenly he was back. On the bridge. Alone. Screaming. The vault loomed ahead. No longer glowing. Now pulsing. The AI returned. Barely. Whispered in his ear. Choice registered. Vault response. Processing. Outcome. Rejected. A beam of white fire shot from the vault's core, not toward them. Through them. Through time. It struck the edge of the galaxy, and suddenly Crucible relics, long dormant, began lighting up across every sector. Hidden caches. Forgotten forges. Sealed AI cores. All of them activated. Thorn fell to his knees. He hadn't won. He hadn't lost. He'd triggered something worse. He'd given the vault permission to finish what the flames started. Raynor burst back onto the bridge minutes later. Thorn, what the hell happened? Thorn stared at the screen, eyes hollow. I thought it was a test. It wasn't. He shook his head. It was an execution protocol. The vault began to open. Petals of alloy unfolding like a god made of memory. Inside, something old, something still being born. The AI's voice cracked as it read the final line. Architect Core Intelligence now in motion. Crucible Empire reinitialization, in progress. And in the silence that followed, Thorn whispered, I didn't pass the test. I was the test. The vault didn't just open, it unfolded, like a flower forged from extinct stars. It bloomed slowly into the dark, petals of crystallized memory forming geometrically perfect arcs around the glowing core. Every surface pulsed with encoded light, colors no living species had names for. They weren't colors, really. They were commands, each one altering something, restarting machines on long-dead moons, repairing the DNA of collapsed civilizations, waking ancient fleets from deep orbit slumber. And every beat of that impossible light whispered the same truth. This is not the end. This is the return. Thorn stood on the bridge of Crucible 1, watching the impossible happen. The vault had accepted his choice, part flame, part future, and now it was writing that choice into reality itself. Systems long thought erased were coming back online. Archives burned in a dozen wars were returning to the galactic datasphere. Architect constructs buried beneath black suns were blinking to life. He hadn't just triggered a weapon, He'd resurrected an empire, but not the one he remembered. Not Rael's empire. Something older, something purer, and very possibly something worse. "We have a problem," Aaron said, bursting onto the bridge. "A big one." Thorn didn't look at him. "Bigger than this?" Aaron threw a data slate onto the console. The screen flickered with dozens of red warning sigils. "The Ashen know," he said. Thorn turned now. "How?" "They've been watching the vault since before we got here. That unlight code Velen sang? It wasn't just a key, it was a beacon." Raynor appeared next, breath tight. "They've mobilized, full fleet. We're talking 70-plus warships, Ashen pattern, modified crucible hulls. Half of them are alive." Thorn looked back to the unfolding vault. "It's not ready." Raynor frowned. "Ready for what?" Thorn's voice dropped. "To protect itself." The Ashen didn't come alone. They brought the echoes, constructs of memory flesh, half-human war forms animated by fractured personality cores, the corpses of former Flameborn, reassembled and reprogrammed to speak in forgotten languages. They didn't fire weapons, they screamed, and those screams tore crucible shielding like wet paper. The attack began before the fleet could even react. Crucible 2 was the first to go down. Its AI hijacked mid-flight, turning its rail cannons on Crucible 3 before crashing into the vault's outer ring. Flameborn aboard the Vagrant Sun reported hallucinations, seeing dead comrades standing beside them, whispering secrets in their ears before pulling them into walls that weren't there. Thorn watched from the tactical feed as it all happened in real time. He didn't flinch, didn't speak, just activated the Crown Protocol. It was the highest authority code the Crucible had ever embedded into a living operator, and it had never been used until now. Every warform aboard the fleet stopped, straightened, then turned toward the vault. They knelt, not to the AI, not to Thorn, but to what was waking inside, and from deep within Crucible 1's command vault, a system locked for over 100,000 years lit up. Arc Sigma. Thorn opened the channel. "Now," he said quietly, "we burn." The Crucible fleet turned as one, fired weapons that hadn't seen the light of a star in 10 lifetimes. Sun spears, reality fractals, singularity braids. The Ashen fleet responded in kind, unlight drives flaring with stolen power, echoes screaming into comms, their ships accelerating not through propulsion, but through force of belief. This wasn't war. This was memory versus memory. The past demanding to survive, the future fighting to exist, and Thorn stood at the heart of it, not as Rael the commander, but as Rael the catalyst. "Massive breach ahead," Nira shouted from the side console. "Something's coming through their rear formation, fast." Thorn turned to the viewport, and his stomach dropped. A single vessel was moving through the Ashen ranks. Not with them. Through them. Ashen ships tried to slow it. One rammed it directly. The vessel didn't budge. The attacker split in half, silently, like reality itself was saying no. The vessel was black, hexagonal, smooth, shifting. And its surface bore no name, no engines, no weapons, just a pulse. Heartbeat red. Aaron cursed. "What the hell is that?" Thorn stepped forward, eyes locked. "I don't know," he said. But he was lying, because something inside him, something that remembered the first flame, whispered, "It's the architect." The vault wasn't just waking up. It was calling home. And now the entity that built it, the one the flame had tried to forget, was returning to see what had become of its greatest creation. The black vessel didn't fire. It just hovered, watching. Its presence alone sent shockwaves across the fleet, Crucible and Ashen alike. Valen Drex, still locked in stasis on Crucible 1, began convulsing. Blood leaked from his eyes, his ears, his mouth. He whispered over and over, "It sees, it sees, it sees." And in his last breath, "It's judging us. Thorn, we can't win this," Raynor snapped. "Even if we stop the Ashen, that thing—" "I know. Then what are we doing?" Thorn looked around the bridge, the crew, his allies, his ghosts, and then he looked at the vault. He didn't see a machine anymore. He saw a mirror. "I'm finishing the war we started," he said. "Not with weapons, not with fire?" Raynor frowned. "Then how?" Thorn clenched his jaw. "With a choice." He transmitted to both fleets, open signal, no encryption, and spoke only one line. "The war is over when you stop trying to win it." The Ashen paused. Not all, but enough. Even their commanders hesitated. Even the corrupted Flameborn, those who remembered Rael not as a monster but as a brother, listened. And in that silence, the vault pulsed again. Not red, but white. The Architect vessel responded, not with words, with motion. A beam of pure light stretched from its hull to the vault, and time around Crucible 1 stopped. Not slowed, stopped. Thorn stood still, but inside him a voice moved. Familiar, female, kind. "We gave you fire to protect what we could not. You chose to wield it as a blade. Now you must decide if you will wield it as a seed." Outside, ships hung motionless, people frozen in expressions of rage, fear, awe. Only Thorn moved. Only he breathed, and only he could respond. "I don't want to be a god," he said softly. "I just want to be better than the ones who thought they were." The vault pulsed again, and the Architect answered, "Then we give you this." A stream of gold light bled into the Crucible core, into Thorn's spine. A data download, a memory code, and with it, a gift. Not knowledge, not weapons, but something far older, understanding. When time resumed, Thorn collapsed to his knees, bleeding, burning, laughing, because for the first time since this started, he finally knew what the Crucible really was. It was never a fleet, it was never a protocol, it was a promise, and now he had to keep it. The stars were wrong near the galactic core. Even from light years out, Crucible sensors detected gravitational distortions that defied known physics. Orbits spun sideways. Space folded in geometric patterns like glass, cracked along invisible lines. Ships that tried to navigate too close were either lost or spat back out. Engines fried, crews catatonic. But the Crucible fleet didn't stop. They followed Thorn. Because now, he wasn't just a commander. He was the key. The gift the vault had given him wasn't a weapon, it was a map, but not of space, of choice. A layered sequence of architect decisions buried across centuries, all leading to a single point, a final construct hidden at the core. Not a station, not a beacon, a decision engine, the first and last machine built to determine whether a species should ascend or disappear. The Crucible had been a stopgap, the vault a container. But this place? This was the sentence, and humanity had arrived to hear it. "Hold formation," Thorn ordered. His voice barely shook, but inside, his pulse roared like war drums. The Flameborn followed without hesitation. Aaron stood at his side, pale but steady. "Are we the first?" Thorn nodded. "The first to reach it, not the first to be judged." Nira leaned over the nav console. "Readings are off the scale. The gravitational lensing is artificial. Something's shaping reality on purpose." "We're flying into a god's brain," Raynor muttered. "Perfect." Thorn didn't argue, because he was starting to feel it too. That presence, not hostile, not welcoming, just waiting. The Crucible fleet pushed through the distortion field. They emerged into a space that shouldn't exist, a void inside the core, perfectly stable, silent, and at its center, a sphere no larger than a house, made of shimmering black crystal, suspended in nothingness, pulsing every 8 seconds. The decision engine. Thorn felt it reach for him. Not physically, not psychically, morally, like it could smell every choice he'd ever made. The fleet anchored in a circular formation around the sphere. Warforms deployed, Flameborn disembarked, and Thorn descended alone. Not because he had to, because no one else could. The path to the sphere opened like a drawbridge of light. No steps, no gravity, just a walk into judgment. He carried nothing, no armor, no sigil, only the code now living inside his spine, given to him by the vault. A golden thread that burned hot beneath his skin whenever he got too close to a lie. The engine spoke before he even reached it, not aloud. Everywhere. You carry contradiction. You chose to merge flame and seed, to wield fire with restraint, to keep what must be broken. Why? Thorn didn't answer right away. He kept walking. Then he said, because I've been both. At the base of the sphere, a panel opened. Inside, 5 chambers, empty, except for one, in its center, where Rael's armor sat, fully intact. Thorn stepped into the platform. The sphere pulsed once. Then speak your name. Thorn didn't hesitate. Thorn. And your burden. He took a breath. All of it. The engine lit, and the world around him vanished. He stood in the ruins of a city he'd never seen before, but remembered intimately. Skyscrapers twisted in midair, fires burned underwater, children played among wreckage while stars blinked out above them. Across from him stood himself. Not Rael, not a copy. Thorn, but clean, unscarred, soft. The version of himself that never went to war. The version that stayed behind. The version that watched others burn. You didn't have to be this, the copy said. Thorn looked away. I didn't have a choice. The copy smiled. That's what all monsters say. Flashes came next. He stood over the bodies of Flameborn he'd abandoned, watched planets burn under his orders. Saw himself hesitate, too late, and watched entire sectors fall because of it. And then he saw Karnax, the old Karnax, whole, alive, where he'd first given the order to build the first flame, and where he'd lied, even to himself. You gave them hope, the engine whispered, but hope is not justice. In the waking world, Raynor paced the Crucible Bridge. Is he alive in there? Aaron was silent. I asked a question. The older Flameborn didn't look up. He's being weighed. Nira narrowed her eyes. Like a soul? No, Aaron said. Like a bomb. Inside the decision engine, Thorn stood before 1,000 versions of himself, each one shouting, crying, bleeding, begging. Some wore sovereign armor, others wore civilian clothes. One sat in a prison cell, another walked hand in hand with a child he never had. They all asked the same question. Was it worth it? He answered only once. Yes. The world fell silent. And then, for the first time in 100,000 years, the decision engine spoke aloud. Rael recognized. Thorn accepted. Crucible valid. Architect intervention, permission granted. Seed code unlocked. The sphere shattered. Not violently, peacefully. The pieces floated outward into space, each fragment becoming a light, a tiny star of data, drifting toward every system in the galaxy. And when they landed, change began. Earth. Terraformers activated in the deepest vaults. Dead colonies. Crucible satellites blinked to life, distributing survival blueprints. Faded species. Memory restorers downloaded lost history into their minds. Even the Ashen, those still alive, fell to their knees as the unlight inside them flickered. Not purged, but balanced, as if the engine had judged them too, and chosen mercy. Back aboard Crucible 1, the crew watched in awe as every screen lit up with architect glyphs translated for the first time in history, and every screen displayed the same phrase, "You may begin again." Thorn collapsed as the light faded. Raynor caught him, just barely. His eyes were wide, wet. "You did it," Raynor whispered. Thorn coughed, wiped blood from his lip. "No," he said. "We haven't done anything yet." The stars trembled. Not from war, not from weapon fire, from correction. 3 days after the decision engine shattered and released the seed code across the galaxy, strange anomalies began to bloom across deep space. Systems that had been stable for eons collapsed into silence. Crucible signals faded. Memory-forged satellites stopped transmitting. But it wasn't failure. It was interference. Something was scrubbing the galaxy, not cleaning it, erasing it. Thorn stood alone in Crucible 1's observation chamber, watching as entire sectors blinked out from the galactic map. Not destroyed, forgotten. Systems marked as active 3 hours ago now showed as never existed. Stars decatalogued, planets removed from Crucible archives, even Flameborn reports, erased in real time. He clenched his fists. The AI tried to explain it. Architect checksum protocol detected. Seed release has triggered automated contradiction purge. Entity incoming, Enforcer class, designation, Sigma Vindicta. Raynor read the name again, disbelief thick in his voice. "Sigma what?" Aaron spoke without looking up. "Vindicta." He knew the name. So did Thorn. It was burned into his earliest memories of the Flame, one of the last architect constructs left behind after the collapse of their civilization. Not a fleet, not a weapon, a judge. Back in the days of the first Flame, the architects had embedded fail-safes across reality, programmed machines to maintain order even after their departure. Most were benign, reactive, silent. But Sigma Vindicta had one purpose: eliminate species who passed judgment without consensus. In other words, kill those who crowned themselves gods. "Estimated time to arrival?" Thorn asked quietly. The AI hesitated. 4 hours, maybe less. Raynor snapped around. "What the hell do we do in 4 hours?" Thorn didn't move. He stared at the holographic projection of Sigma Vindicta, just a red dot on the edge of space. But he didn't need a visual. He remembered enough to know what was coming. A vessel larger than a moon, carved from architect bone, staffed not by crew, but ideology. A machine that could erase planets not with fire, but with logic. And now, it was coming for him. "You knew this was a risk," Aaron said later, voice low, bitter. They stood in the war planning chamber. The Flameborn leaders seated around them wore the weight of the coming judgment like a chain around their necks. "I made a choice," Thorn said. "You made a mistake," Aaron snapped. "You activated the vault without consensus. You took the flame and fused it with the seed. You rewrote our identity. I gave us a future. You gave us a target." A heavy silence. No one spoke. Until Nira said what everyone else feared. "They're going to erase us." Sigma Vindicta wasn't a fleet. It didn't ask questions. It didn't offer trial. It wasn't here to conquer. It was here to correct. A whisper from the AI confirmed what Thorn already suspected. Sigma Vindicta views Crucible expansion as an unauthorized evolutionary event. Judgment status, red level purge. Humanity classification, contaminant. Options? Thorn asked the room. None were good. The Crucible fleet couldn't match Sigma in raw power. They were built to survive unlight and reforge civilization, not resist architect war code. Even if they fled, Vindicta would trace the seed's energy signature across the galaxy, and target every flame-born and every planet marked with crucible tech. Running wouldn't save them. Hiding would buy them days at most. Fighting would lead to extinction. Unless... "There's one option," Thorn said at last, voice iron. The room looked to him. He took a breath. "We talk to it." Raynor laughed, once, short and bitter. "Talk to a machine that deletes planets for existing?" "Talking's what got us here," Aaron said coldly. "No," Thorn snapped. "Silence is what got us here. The architects left us nothing but bones and warnings. This is the first time we get to answer them back." He looked to the room. "Let me speak to it." Nira leaned in. "And what happens when it doesn't like your answer?" Thorn stared her dead in the eyes. "Then I ask a better question." Sigma Vindicta arrived on the edge of Null Sector like a black eclipse. Its structure wasn't linear. It unfolded itself in real time, forming geometric shapes that defied the Crucible fleet's visual systems. Some saw a cube, others saw a sphere. Some stared at it too long and bled from the eyes. But Thorn saw purpose. He stood alone on the bridge, armored now, not for war, but for recognition. Rael's sigil embedded into his chest plate. Seed protocol glowing beneath his skin. He stepped forward, opened comms, and said, "Sigma Vindicta, this is Thorn. I submit myself for query." The response wasn't sound. It was logic. A series of pulses through the Crucible AI, bending its core systems until it became a mouthpiece. "Query accepted. Identity, Rael, class, sovereign error. Accusation, unauthorized civilization reboot. Verdict, terminal." Thorn didn't flinch. "You built the flame to preserve your legacy," he said. "I've seen the records. You left the vault for us. You coded the Crucible. You designed the decision engine." Silence. Then, "The decision engine was never meant to pass." Thorn took a step forward. "Then you failed to understand what would happen if it did." Vindicta's tone changed, deeper, colder. "Fire burns, seeds rot. You chose contradiction. You chose hope. Hope is not permitted." The Crucible crew watched from their screens in stunned silence. Sigma Vindicta was debating, or simulating debate. Raynor whispered, "He's holding its attention." Nira shook her head. "No, he's buying us time." Thorn pressed forward. "You abandoned us. You erased your own species. You set traps across the galaxy to prevent anyone from waking what you built. And when someone finally did, you came to end it." The AI's voice crackled. "We ended ourselves because we knew what we were. We were arrogant. We built gods and called them children. You are our echo. And echoes must fade." Thorn stepped directly to the edge of the projection zone. "I'm not your echo. I'm your answer." For the first time, Vindicta paused. A moment of processing, a ripple across its outer geometry. Thorn took the chance. "You built the Crucible to hold your fire. I've carried it, I've lit it, and I've learned to wield it without becoming a tyrant." He spread his arms. "I didn't just win a war, I survived a history." Then he said the one thing he hadn't said since Karnax. "I forgive you." The galaxy held its breath. The AI whispered one final time. "Then prove it. Sacrifice your command." Thorn froze. "You want me to give it up?" "Yes." "If your choice was for life, then step aside. And let them live without your name guiding them." It was the only price that made sense. Hope had a cost. Leadership had a limit. Even Rael, in the end, had burned too bright. Thorn looked to his crew, to the Flameborn who still watched, to the galaxy trying to begin again. And he smiled. Then removed the sigil, dropped it, and said, "Then let them write their own future." Sigma Vindicta didn't respond. It folded in on itself, vanished, No light, no pulse, just gone. The Crucible fleet returned to full function. No enemies, no commands, just freedom. And silence. Later, Raynor found Thorn alone in the command chamber. He sat quietly. No armor, no rank. Just a man. "What now?" Raynor asked. Thorn smiled faintly. "We build something we're not ashamed to survive." Raynor nodded slowly. "Still think you made the right call?" Thorn looked out at the stars. "I made the last one I'll ever make." The war was over, but peace didn't feel like peace. Not yet. 3 months had passed since Sigma Vindicta vanished, accepting Thorn's surrender of command. 3 months since the galaxy stopped tearing itself apart over power, memory, and fire. The Crucible fleets scattered. Not in retreat, in rebirth. War forms reprogrammed for agriculture. Flameborn returned to forgotten worlds and began building without bunkers, without fortresses. For the first time in 100,000 years, there were no directives, no sovereign, no supreme command, just the question, now what? Thorn never gave them an answer. He stepped down as leader, silently, no ceremony. He handed the Crucible over to those who'd earned it, people who wanted to lead, not just fight. Then he disappeared. Not to hide, to remember. Because peace doesn't start with orders. It starts with grief. And after everything he'd done, Thorn still had names burned into his spine, men and women who had died for the flame, for him, for a future they never lived to see. He owed them memory. So he returned to the beginning. Karnax. Not the false one, the shattered battlefield he'd rediscovered during the war. The real Karnax. The first cradle of flame, now buried under time, weather, and a layer of planetary ash thick enough to erase 100 years. No one remembered it but him. And even he wasn't sure he wanted to. He dug the ruins out by hand, refused shovels, refused tech. He bled for every memory, every buried wall, every broken emblem, and finally, beneath a cracked obsidian altar, he found it. A sealed chamber, untouched by time. A Crucible forge core, still active, still pulsing, still waiting. It should have been empty. The vault's seed code had already awakened everything else. But this forge wasn't built for weapons. It was built for messages. The architects had hidden something here. Something meant to be opened only by the last sovereign. He placed his hand on the console. The core lit up. A voice, not his, but close, echoed through the chamber. "Rail, if you're hearing this, you've done the unthinkable. You've survived. And worse, you've made a choice without us. Good." The voice was male, measured, calm. But there was no warmth, only calculation. The voice continued. "We were wrong to believe perfection was sustainable. We created the flame to preserve truth, but we forgot that truth needs change. The Crucible was never supposed to burn forever. It was supposed to light the way to something else. That something is you." Thorn didn't blink, didn't breathe. The message kept going. "If you activated the vault, the galaxy now stands on a blade's edge. And if Vindicta accepted your surrender, then you have one final task." A section of the chamber opened. Not a weapon, not armor, a seed, encased in alloy, the size of a closed fist, radiating soft, harmonic pulses. Crucible and Architect code merged into one. Alive, not metaphorically, biologically, and attached to the casing. A final command string. "Plant me where no command has ever taken root. Where history is not written in blood. Let the flame die, so something else can live." He held the seed, felt it vibrate. It wasn't a symbol. It was a new species, one that wouldn't burn the stars to survive, one that didn't need to be forged in fire. A people who could live without the weight of sovereigns, flame-born, crucible warships, and the legacy of collapsing empires. It didn't need him. It needed a start. He left Karnax the next morning. Didn't call for the fleet. Didn't tell Raynor. Didn't tell Nira or Aaron or the rebuilt Forge Council. He took the seed, boarded a skiff, and flew alone into the uncharted verge, the edge of mapped space, beyond even what the architects had once known. Not to hide it, to plant it. There were no monuments where he landed. No archives, just dust, wind, and silence. He buried the seed beneath the surface of a nameless world with 2 suns and violet oceans. He didn't wait for it to sprout, didn't build a city, didn't leave a plaque. He just sat beside it until the sun dipped below the horizon. And then he walked away. 5 years later, stories of a new people began to surface. Not flame-born, not ashen, not crucible-trained. They grew in isolation, but their DNA matched pre-architect human baselines, untouched by war gene mods or sovereign edits. But somehow, they could read crucible code with no training. They dreamed in stars, and every one of them bore a birthmark shaped like a flame with an open center, a hole where a name once sat. When the Forge Council finally located the planet, they sent envoys to speak with the new people. The envoys returned with no footage, no reports, only one sentence. They already know who they are. Thorn was never found, but on the cliffs overlooking the seed site, the Forge Council eventually discovered a single armor plate, half buried in the stone. Rael's sigil, scarred and faded. Next to it, a knife. Carved into the rock beneath it were 6 words. No title, no credit. Just this: "We were the fire. This is enough." And for the first time in 10,000 wars, the galaxy stayed quiet.